So I'm delighted to be joined here today by Dr. Mark Bellamy, who has worked with myself and Try Training Harder. I'm trying to work this out, Mark. We started the race team, I think, 2012-ish, and so you've been with us from pretty much the beginning there.
It must be 5 or 6 or 7 years that we've done work together, mustn't it? It's been a long time.
It's been quite a while, and in that time,
Being the evolution of the team.
Yeah, exactly. So Mark's helped myself not just as an athlete, I guess, but also as a coach to learn more about how people work, and also help to work with our race team as well. That kind of performance end for our athletes, as long with, I guess, inspiring and helping many of our coaches as well. So I think it's probably. I won't do it a true justice, but it'd be great, Mark, if you could just give us a short sort of introduction, I guess, on where you've come into this performance psychology and that aspect of sport.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I started off life as an exercise physiologist, and I think, like many of us do, as a sportsman as well. Had a very significant car crash in my late 20s, and for various reasons that led me to do a PhD around the area of psychology, which I thoroughly enjoyed. But really got me into sort of high performance sport over about a 20-year stretch, which was absolutely great fun. During that time, I was lucky enough to support 3 Olympic Games for UK athletics with track and field. Did a lot of work with the military, PT Corps, which was great fun, and then with many individual athletes. So obviously I've been around for quite a long time, which has given me the scope just to get involved in lots and lots of different sports, lots of different projects, and with lots of different sports people. Probably over the last 5 or 6 years, I've spent also a lot of time around that whole area of development, and also what I would call positive mental health, how you protect yourself from mental health issues by understanding how to be really, really strong in this stuff that actually keeps you healthy. I found that's a big area to work in, a really interesting area, and I think mental health, unfortunately, is the poor cousin of all of the areas we work in, and seems to be the one that we're least proactive about. And I think there's a lot we can do there, and a lot we can do to support sports people in that area as well. One of the reasons I work there.
I guess on that note, I think it was you who mentioned that most people in their house, in their kitchen, in their workplace have a first aid kit. Some people even in their car, and I know when we're on rides out in the Algarve or training sessions, a coach will have a first aid kit on them for physical health, but very rarely do we have a similar sort of approach within the mental health and helping reactively but also preventatively.
Well, we don't, and I think that there's 2 things there. One is we don't even have a first aid mental health kit, but secondly, and you wouldn't be expecting your athletes to go into a heavy duty performance without having looked after their physical health and their physical fitness. And I think we can build resilience in mental health before we ever get to the problem where we need a first aid kit. So we should rarely need a first aid kit if we're getting it right, and if we do need to use a first aid kit, we should then need to know what we can do. And I feel that mental health still has some stigma around it, which is crazy, because actually everything we do starts with our brains, and it's not surprising that sometimes they don't work as well as they could for us, and sometimes they get overloaded, and sometimes we're not sure how to react with feelings. So I think it's in a way more surprising that we're concerned about revealing mental health issues than or if you like, that we've got to this point. I think maybe things are changing, but I think it's a great conversation to have, to make it part of being an athlete in terms of looking after your mental health as well as your physical health.
So it goes very nicely into the point where you're here today to talk to us about building the pyramid, and I guess the other side of an athlete, which is the mental side, and how to help them perform. I guess for you then, you propose the idea of building a pyramid. What would you What would you say is that classic pyramid when looking at it from a performance psychology point of view, rather than most athletes will sit there going, building a base of a pyramid, that's lots of endurance, and they're going to start slowly building into the season. So I love the analogy, but how would you describe it?
Well, absolutely, and I think understanding the analogy is key. But I think at the bottom of that pyramid, we absolutely have our health, and within that, I think we have our physical health. I think we have our diet. I think we have our physical fitness. I think we have our mental health. And I think if we get those sat at the bottom, and they probably contain quite a few things in the fact that quite often we don't feel great, and we forget that we probably haven't dealt with the basics. Have we eaten well? Have we slept well? Have we actually hydrated well? So those simple things, getting them right, actually mop up a lot, whether we're talking about physical or mental health. Then I think we get into rest and recovery. I think we get into the social stuff. Actually, are we putting things into our lives that bring us joy? And then there's little things around the edge. How much do we drink? It's very, very easy for alcohol to be a little bit of a self-medication when things are going a little bit wrong. And then, of course, if we're training hard on the top of that. And then I think we get into things like finance. I think we get into injury management. I think we get into family. And then I think we get into our own monitoring and awareness. And actually just going, hang on, that's one of the pillars, or that, if you like, it's probably more than the pillar, it's probably the base of everything else we do. If we get that stuff right, the rest of it, I wouldn't say is easy, because it's not, but it becomes possible, and it becomes plausible. And it becomes possible and plausible long term, which I think is what a lot of our athletes want. I think another really important consideration is my experience of athletes is that they tend to do better over a longer period of time when they're thriving rather than just surviving. And getting this stuff on the base of the pyramid right is a great way to allow thriving to happen.
So, if you're talking about thriving, how would you describe an athlete is thriving, and what would you see as maybe the telltale points to an athlete surviving, both as an athlete monitoring that, but I guess also as a coach?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. One of the things that I think is really worth looking at is just simply the capacity, the spare capacity that an athlete has, whether that is physical, whether that is mental, whether that is emotional. And I'm sure everyone who's a coach and everyone who's an athlete will get lots and lots of tells there. But in simple terms, when we're out of capacity, we're probably in panic, or we're probably surviving or hanging on. So actually, the one big thing I look for is spare capacity. So when I see someone's revving too hard to stay in position, if you like, or if I'm looking at that broad spectrum of what's going on, we're probably, in a way, I guess what we're doing is we're managing about 6, 7 or 8 key factors that underpin our ability to perform. And if we think about that in terms of spinning plates, we need to be keeping all of those up. And we're probably better off when we're keeping all of those running at about 80% than having some things running really, really well and some things not been looked after at all. And so I would be looking at almost an audit of what's going on in somebody's life and the stuff that we know impacts on their performance, whether it's short term, whether it's mid term, or whether it's long term, and actually having strategies to make those things work. But as I say, not make them work necessarily at 100%. We're much better off having them all working at about 80% than some of them great, but probably short term. They're probably going to get knocked over at some point if you've got other things that are going to underpin them or undermine them.
I think one of our team athletes, Ollie Stoughton, who I know you know quite well, he always used to have the analogy, and it kind of came through our house at university, the analogy of if you've got a cooker, kind of classic cooker, you've got the 4 hobs, you've got 2 at the front and 2 at the back, and everything needs to be bubbling away, but you can only ever put your energy into 2 of those at any one time. Those 2 stay at the front, and if you start trying to have all those hobs bubbling at full pelt, inevitably everything will bubble over and you'll have a big mess, and it won't quite be kind of performing in the way you want to?
Yeah, well, we both know Ollie very well, and we're both very impressed with some of the things that he's made happen in the world. So I think he's a great advocate for this type of approach, but also what you can do when you can get it right. And you're absolutely right. We don't need to be attending to everything at the same time, but we do need to be taking care of business. And again, I think this tells you why so much of being successful in sport is actually very, very procedural. You make sure you've got things locked away and dealt with, and then it allows you to work on the things that maybe are at the really sharp, pointy end of performance. So absolutely, we've got limited, and again, I think this comes back to capacity. We've got limited capacity. I don't know about you, but my instinct is that people can focus on maybe 2 or 3 things maximum at a time, and when we try and make our attention there, almost by definition, we're not focused anymore. So it's taking care of business on a broader scheme, but it's also knowing where we need to put our focus when it really matters. And again, those things work. If you haven't dealt with them, those things will come up and bite you in the arse at the worst possible moment, by the way.
Capacity changes depending on what it is that you're doing. So let's just say you've got your training capacity, that will ebb and flow through the whole season. Clearly, this time of year, capacity is probably, you've got quite a lot of capacity because generally people are in that off-season period. Maybe the focus isn't quite on that high performance. Where it comes into sort of a few days before an event, the capacity for trading is probably quite low because you're wanting to taper and have a peak performance. But actually, the focus is all on that area just there. And I guess each of those different plates that you're spinning will require different levels of focus. So your overall capacity needs to allow for the different levels of capacity an individual might have in each of their plates, I guess, the areas of their life that they have to deal with.
Yeah, you need to know when you need to attend to different things. And again, so as we come into the season, and I've actually put, when we're talking about this pyramid, I've talked about the performance plan, peaking in the performance plan, obviously near the top of the pyramid. And if you think we're building it on top of that, we want that to be sustainable underneath. I mean, if we want to look, I've actually gone that we look at health in the first place. But then underneath that, I've probably looked at training, and after that, I've looked at recovery. So let's get our training right and make sure our training pays attention to what we need and pays attention to what we need at a particular part of the season, if you like. As you just noted, it's going to be very, very different based on whether we're just about to come into competition or whether at this stage of the year when I guess people, they're probably getting ready to see how much Christmas dinner they can eat, aren't they, at this time of the year? But they're doing whatever they need to do. And the other side of the equation, and it's one that I notice people who have busy lives tend to miss out, is the real equation with trading is that we add load or we add stress, and we purposely overreach and get worse, but it's during that recovery phase that we actually come back and get better. And I think most people's attention is still on the training rather than the good stuff happens in recovery. And I ask, and it's probably worth just asking yourself. I just asked as a global figure, what out of 10 you would give yourself in recovery? And intuitively, I think people know that 7 out of 10 and better, you're taking care of business. Therefore, 6 and lower, you're not, or just about not. And anyone who's 6 out of 10 or worse on recovery, you might be missing out on some performance traits in a really simple way, just by putting attention there.
I think there's an interesting balance as well with sleep, because a lot of athletes are very, very good at, I guess, taking some time, to training. They can fit 25 hours into a 24-hour day. They'll get up early, they'll do training. And as you said, that sacrifice and getting up early and doing training is in the recovery, but they've not missed on the training, so they feel like everything's going really well. Going back to the capacity, I guess then what you're saying is that capacity is being reduced because your health is being affected by your
Well, it
ability
is,
to recover.
and over a longish period of time, you suffer from it. And actually, also what we know is, of course, as you come closer and closer, if your habits are that a lot of what we're doing in whether we're training or whether we're academics or whether we're working, we're trying to develop habits that are useful for us. If the habits you develop are around doing more training and missing recovery, it's quite likely that that's going to be the same habit that occurs around competition, where you really want everything to work for you. So we need to understand that it is an equation, and it does have two sides to balance, and we need to get them both. Now, absolutely, I think athletes are great at managing time. I work with a group of athletes at Oxford University, and they tend to be doing perhaps 40 hours study a week to stay on top of things, and they're doing anywhere between about 10 and 25 hours training. So their average load may be about 65 hours, which is pretty hardcore if you're not getting your recovery absolutely right. And of course, it's the bit that slips, it's the bit that slips. So the average score there, I would say, and I don't think they'd mind me telling you, would be probably about 5 out of 10. So we've got massive performance benefits just by making sure you sleep properly, making sure you eat properly, making sure you take some hydration, and then doing the things that when you train, you do your prehab work, you do your pre-performance work, you warm up properly and you cool down properly. Really basic things, but that actually have a big performance impact over a long period of time. It's almost like you may be losing 10 or 15% of what you can get from your training when you don't deal with the other side of the equation. That's my view. That's my view, and I think it's something that's worth getting into, and it makes you more professional in your field about how you are as an athlete when you're taking care of that bit of business. You know you're not eating into your capital, and again, it's a really nice way of looking at it. You think about what you've got as your bank account. Are you eating into it, or are you adding into it, or are you adding to it? If you're adding to it, you're getting bigger and more powerful as an athlete. If you're eating into it, you're getting to a point where there's going to be a problem at some point, and we don't want that. We want everything.
I guess the other part of that as well is that if you have an athlete who is eating into their bank account, they're at that lower end of that Mark's out of 10 in terms of their recovery. Almost if you're tired, it's very difficult to say how much more tired you are, because when you get to, I guess, 3 or 4, really, if you're 3 or 4 or 1 or a 2, you probably won't notice the difference. It's all muchness. Whereas if you're going from an 8 or a 9 and you say, I'm feeling a bit tired today, you might only be a 6 or a 7, but you can feel that because it's almost a clear, discrete change. So you can keep your finger on your pulse quite literally in terms of how are you performing as an athlete, how are you feeling? Is this a day to go harder? Is this a day to back off a little bit and recover in a clever way? So if you're going to keep on hammering yourself and not quite getting a chance to recover, you'll never really know.
I think that's a really good point, Philip. I think when you're flat, and you know it. And as you say, whether it's a 1 or a 3 or a 4, you're still pretty flat. You're not taking care of business. And it also, I think what happens, it becomes the new norm, and it almost becomes an expectation around doing a high load of training that you feel like that. Whereas actually, I think it's very, very possible for athletes to be thriving, even while they're doing a heavy duty load training wise. But it does need that real attention, and I would have people just monitoring 5 or 6 key indices there, probably around recovery, around fatigue, around sleep, around pain, maybe mood state, almost certainly diet, and probably sources of stress, and just looking at those and seeing how those things change on a daily basis when load changes and when you're getting recovery right, and just getting those indicators, because what you actually want as an athlete is very, very good self-awareness, but also you want almost objective things that tell you what's going on, because I think what can happen as we get more stressed and maybe our recovery gets worse, our blinkers come on and our focus gets more and more closed into just simply the tasks ahead of us, and we forget, actually, as I said right at the beginning, we are spinning a set of plates, and I'd like people to be spinning those 5 or 6 or 7 plates reasonably well, 8 out of 10, but all of them, rather than just that narrow focus on what seems important but is actually losing the base of the pyramid when that's where our focus goes.
I guess that brings us really nicely into peaking and that the kind of the next level of your pyramid, because if you're starting to peak, I think everything starts going focused towards said event. I mean, obviously speaking here about sport, but it could be a peak in terms of an event which is, family orientated. Maybe you've got the birth of a new child coming along, or you've got other things which are deadlines in work which are taking your focus. And I guess that's peaking, but in a different way for the different aspects of those or different types of plates you've got. But if you're looking at it from an athlete's point of view, I've definitely had conversations with athletes like, I need to go and do this training session because I've got this event coming up in a month's time, a few days' time, a week's time, whatever. And they're sat there worrying about what they need to do and missing out on that bigger picture. And as you said, blinkers come on, plates start getting getting dropped because they're not getting those other areas correct. But I guess, how would you describe peaking?
Well, I mean, if I was going to be really simple about what peaking is getting yourself into a state where you're optimizing all of the strengths you've got in order to be able to perform when you want to. So then what peaking is what sits behind that. I think you probably harped on or hit upon something that is quite important for a lot of athletes, in the fact that I think a lot of endurance athletes particularly, but also a lot of gym goers and every sport really, a lot of why they do sport is their therapy. And that means there's a need or a feeling that you need to do stuff on a daily basis because it makes you feel better. But what you feel you need for your therapy may not be what you need for your performance. And and just that awareness that why you're doing your sport, absolutely you may want performances, but also what it gives you. Probably one of the reasons that you're in it is because it gives you something else very, very strong. But having that ability to be able to split those and say, well, what do I actually need in terms of coming down in the volume or the intensity of the load as I get closer to competition. So I do have that capacity and I do have that freshness and I do have all that energy inside me ready to come out, rather than having largely been used up through the training. If we think about training response, we're looking for overload so that we can create, if you like, an inflammation response so that we can supercompensate. Well, close to competition, you may not be looking for that. You may just be looking for what you've got and putting all of that together. So again, how you peak is about planning for it, but it's also about self-knowledge. And although great coaches will help their athletes peak, probably some of the best knowledge you've got is what actually happens to you under certain conditions, because we all differ, we're all individual. We all get impacted on differently by our lives and our training. And just the simple act of keeping a training diary over months and years starts to give you that intelligence about what you want to have in your peaking program. And it may be that you're really clear whether it's the birth of your daughter or whether it's the biggest athletic event of the year, what you want to control and manage around that allows your resources to be geared towards making that happen, and how you want to be, and also how you want to allow yourself to be when things go wrong, because most of the plans I've ever put into place with people haven't unfolded perfectly. I'm sure you know that. So it's the approach you bring with it that allows a plan to happen. And again, that goes back to me saying at that point you need spare capacity. If we're right on the fizzy edge of running out of capacity and something goes wrong, we may not have the resources to deal with that. So that little bit of spare at that point can be critical.
I think it's also worth pointing out, if you've got that intelligence from training diaries, and if you know yourself as an athlete or as a coach, you really understand the athlete. If you are running close to that edge, and you've used the word buffer before when we've been speaking about athletes, and capacity and buffer, I think they're interchangeable there, but you might tell me differently. But that if you know that you're running right on the rivet and you know things are getting quite close, you can make a decision and say, look, we're running really close. We are now, if something goes wrong here, we haven't got much capacity to deal with it. And this is a conscious decision, as opposed to a situation when you have no idea, you're blissfully unaware, and you're going along, and there is something which is potentially going to be quite derailing just around the corner, and you haven't got the capacity, you don't know what's going to happen, and that can be real life. Job suddenly changes, or can be athletic, and suddenly you pick up a niggle or an injury, and if you've already been pushing, then it's going to be hard to come back from that.
I think understanding where you are in capacity is really, really important. I mean, I use with my athletes, I use a traffic light system. So we go, are we in green? Are we in amber? Are we in red? We obviously try not to be in red, but we also want to know the things that move us back down the scale. So again, when we're under stress and high levels of pressure, you don't want to be having to think too much about what you need to do. You almost want to recognize where you are and have the set of things that you know that you need to do. And it may be as simple as taking a couple of things out of your life. I don't know about you, Philip, but one of the things I've noticed is when people get busier, it seems to be easier to get them to do more and more and more. You always give something to a busy person. And I think as people get more and more loaded, it gets easier for them to take on something and something. And actually what we may need to be doing at those points is taking things out of our lives and just simplifying things at that point. So absolutely, if we go back to the birth of a daughter or a son, you probably want to be minimizing some of your other commitments in those days around that very important part of your life. Well, exactly the same as we come up to an important athletic event. How much control have you got of your work, or perceptually how much control have you got of your work in terms of what you're allowing yourself to take on?
A bit more about that perceptual control of work, because that individual control that an athlete may have, I'm not saying that athletes are controlling people by any means, but the ability to have a perception of control, I think, is a really interesting part of helping someone come together with their own plan.
Well, if we think about anything at all that we have to do, and then you think, well, it has an emotional impact in terms of how much that loads us. So we can have the task itself, but also how we think about that task and the ramifications of getting it right or wrong. Can be a style of thinking. So if we can just stick to the task that we have to do, rather than if I get this wrong, it makes me hopeless and everyone will hate me, and all of these other styles of thinking, but also just the perspective that says most of the things we do in the world are not life and death, but they can seem it at the time. So the threat very often is created in our brains. We create our own threats, because the reality of most things, whether we do well or not, is we live another day, and actually a year or two down the road, they're memories. So actually, if we can put ourselves in the present with that knowledge that actually my job is to go out here and do this, and there's a very specific task there, and we don't have to add anything extra to it. We just simply have to do what that is, and the closer we can get to that, if you like, the less additional loading we're putting on ourselves. And just that little bit of knowledge, whether or not we're getting very emotional about something, probably tells us that we're not thinking about it in the clearest way, and we're using more energy than we want. Our emotions, by and large, particularly our negative emotions, are a shout out to get ready for something. And quite often we focus on the nastiness of the emotion itself, rather than actually it's shouting at you, and it feels horrible because it needs to get your attention, but it's asking you to go and do something about the challenge that's in front of you. And if we can see it as simply as that, it actually makes life very, very easy for a lot of the time. And again, as I think you alluded to, the perception that we have around what we're doing, a lot of sport is about doing things at high intensity, but without appearing to put great effort into it. Because as soon as we start to really force things, we quite often lose that fluidity of movement and that beauty that we can do when we do things when we're not under pressure. And of course, that's an efficiency and effectiveness that we can bring to it if we can bring that type of mindset. which is great fun, and everyone will know that some of the time, and probably not all the time, and very often that's the difference between truly great performers and people one or two notches down. That ability to make that happen and appear as though they've got all the time and space in the world, because they've stripped a lot of the nonsense away while they're performing.
That is a very interesting topic of conversation, which I would like to go down that rabbit warren a little bit more, but I'm going to pause there.
Yeah.
The one thing I'd say is that phrase of "it's just a game" or "it's just a race," and how you can turn that from a kind of, I suppose, a negative and into a positive would be an interesting conversation to listen into. But
I think doing something that means everything to you at the time, but almost making it appear as though it doesn't, can be quite a magnificent skill. And sometimes we touch it, don't we? So yeah. I'm not saying it's an easy one to get to, but it's a nice thing to make happen. And again, I would also say, by the way, that I think a lot of what we talked about in putting that pyramid and all the stuff that underpins it are the processes that allows that almost that peak performance state to occur. You know, it is a procedural set of actions that gets us to the point where we can just perform without anything else going on.
I was about to say that's interesting, because it's not so much the ability to talk about sport performance at the kind of this end here, that kind of the very, very high performance end, and people look at sort of the top athletes. They'll watch Federer playing tennis, or you can think of golfers as they come and go on, where there's a skill which is much easier to see, or some of the top endurance athletes. And people talk about mind, grit, determination, ability to perform, and sports performance psychology. Everyone thinks about almost those sort of things, but as you're stating, and I've definitely seen firsthand, both working with you and athletes, you can never get anywhere near that ability to be totally immersed in your sport and almost do things effortlessly unless you have a really strong foundation of your health, your family, your finances are in a good place. Those distractions aren't distracting you, so you can put in the training, which allows you then to do the training to recover. And as you said, it's the process.
And I think you maybe see it in people for a little while, but not a long while. And then when you see the people who are there for a long time, they do tend to have things in place. So we might get these little peaks, but actually that sustainability. And again, I think when we talk about our sporting careers or whatever career we have, at the end, as we get older and get towards the end of our lives, we want to be able to look back and be proud and pleased with what we've done in our lives. And actually, understanding that approach early on is great. I mean, I think as a coach, that's one of the joys of coaching, or for me as a psychologist, one of the joys of being a psychologist is trying to help people get this stuff into them early enough where their bodies still work beautifully to make it happen. But also that then gives them the possibility of a very, very sustained career at whatever level they want to be. There's nothing much less pleasant than coming in and out of an injury cycle that you didn't need to be in because you've pushed too hard to that raggedy edge for too long, and of course things have gone wrong. So again, I think a lot of how I work as a psychologist is in that protection of people and protection of their resources. We're talking now, but I think one of the things that gets people to be great at things are the super strengths they have. And I say, well, if that's your super strength, don't you want to nourish it and nurture that and protect it rather than pushing it as hard as you can to see what it's like when it's broken? Because the problem we have in sport is we know what stuff's like when it's not broken. We can see it in front of us, and then we use it and push it, but we don't know what it's going to be like and what it's going to be like getting back from when it is broken. Not impossible, but it's a harder game. So there's a lot to be said for understanding yourself and looking after yourself and nurturing and nourishing some of those bits that you obviously absolutely love about what makes you able to be very physical